an unusual blacksmith shop, from a book of old-fashioned fairy tales and fables, by Chuma Ikenze. There once lived a blacksmith who owned a special blacksmith shop. This particular blacksmith lived a lonely life, because he did his work at night, while others were asleep, and slept during the day while others were at work. One day, the blacksmith caught a cold, and his wife wanted him to stay home to rest. So he was not expecting to go to his shop that night. When dusk came, and he had not shown up, the fire spirit in the forge decided to get some extra snooze, instead of getting ready to wake up, as he would when dusk arrived. Only his breath glowed under the ashes, and scattered some short-lived sparks into the growing darkness. The sparks briefly shed dim lighting that showed a bellow hanging in grumpy folds. It looked like a fat man with very thin legs. There was an anvil with a thick head and pointed snout, and there was a heap of scrap metals in the corner of the shop, metals that the blacksmith would have worked on if he had not caught a cold that day. Suddenly the anvil came to life, turning its head in all directions until it settled its gaze on the heap of scrap metals. They were all soiled and dusty, like people who had taken a long and difficult trek through the dirtiest terrain to get to the smith shop. The anvil, who was relatively clean, looked at the heap and said with contempt in his voice, "What rabble comes together here? It is a good thing that these scraps have to be burned clean in the forge before they are put on my head, otherwise it would be too unpleasant. No siree, my head is too clean for this." The anvil never considered for a minute that it too was made of iron, or that the scrap metals had also been shiny at some time. He only thought of them as rusty, dusty, and dirty from the start. And that was it. He had no idea how much work the blacksmith had put into collecting this heap of scrap metals in order to forge them during the twilight hours. The scrap metals felt relieved when the anvil turned its back on them, and they no longer felt his dismissive looks. Then they began to talk in whispers. It turned out that there were pieces of very different ages in the pile. There were very old items that belonged in antique collections, and very young ones that had only been in the world a few years. But they all looked the same. "You are so rusty," said a chain, sympathetically to an old sword. "That is a very bad disease. You are certainly not feeling well." The sword creaked between the hilt and the blade, replying, "It's an old ailment. I've had it for many years. It is from the stains of blood. I've seen terrible things on my way through life. I have passed through many hands and bodies. Many took me to kill others. All the blood and all the tears have eaten into me. I have had little rest. I have waded in blood." The one who shed the most blood rang bells with the same hands and called his slaughter victory. "I am only a few years old," said a young saber, "but I have experienced the same." "I've seen other types of victories," said an old rusty bolt. "I have seen the thoughts of people who have been subdued. I locked the door behind which the conquered sat rotting away in their dungeons. But their thoughts passed through me and the dungeon door out into the streets to live on in the hopes of others." "I am far younger than you," said another bolt, "but I had to do the same, and have seen similar things." As the metal scraps were chatting, the first ray of moonlight entered the room and shone more brightly on the heap of scrap metals. All of the scraps became very embarrassed and depressed because their many stains now appeared even more clearly than when the light came from the fire spirit breathing with difficulty in the narrow forge. An old iron hook looked sadly at his body and said, as if begging for forgiveness, "I once held a man who was accused of heresy. He was chained to the wall. I remember his last night. A man in a black robe sat next to him and had a book in his hand, which was supposed to be his sacred book. But the man in the black robe did not try to relieve the condemned man's pain by removing me from his body. I worked in the slaughterhouse," said a long knife. "I saw the horrified look in the eyes of thousands of animals before they went out. I have seen 1,000 animal souls wandering around in the slaughterhouse." Then a saber with a tassel and a pearl piece embedded in its hilt spoke. "A piece of me used to be a pearl in the rosary bead of an old man who lived in India. The saintly old man would sweep the road ahead of him with his weak arms so that he did not step on any creatures. He called the worm, his brother, and asked for the blessings of his gods on them. He spoke of how everything is connected. He would draw a prayer card in the sand and finger his rosary devoutly while the wind blew the prayer card away. The saber paused for a while to suppress the tears that were beginning to well up in his eyes. Then he continued, "But we have to walk through many forms in our journey of life. My pearl learned this from the old man in India. I don't know which form I will become next, or whether I will get to choose." At that statement, everyone shouted, "One thing is for sure. We cannot stay in our current condition. We are dirty and covered with stains. We want to be cleansed. We want to go to the fire spirit to be purified, to take on another form. We do not wish the sun to rise because we don't want its light to show up our dirt and our stains. Unfortunately, the blacksmith is not coming to work today, and we have to live with our shame for yet another day." Just then, a spark flew from the forge into the middle of the scrap metals and announced with a hiss, "The blacksmith is not at home sleeping. He is feeling better and has decided to come to work." Then the spark went out. All the items in the heap of scrap metals let out cries of great joy. They each gave thanks to whoever had made this possible. They were thrilled that they would not have to spend another day of shame, covered in the filth and stains inflicted upon them by humans. Then the door opened, and the blacksmith entered. He was a serious and quiet man with sad eyes. He picked the bellows off the wall and kicked it so that all the folds of its stomach opened and swelled up. Then he stoked the fire spirit in the narrow forge. Finally, he grabbed a handful of old scrap metals and threw them into the fire. After the baptism of fire, he brought out the pieces that had been purified and placed them on the anvil to forge them into their new shape. "What will become of us? What new form will he give us?" asked the purified scraps. The smith struck. Sparks flew, and a new shape began to form. But this smith forged only one shape, the final shape for all metals that have experienced too much bloodstains. When he finished, a shiny plowshare stood on the dewy earth in front of the forge.